All right. Everybody welcome Arkadiy Tetelman, Chief or Head of Infrastructure and Security at Chime. Is that correct?
Head of InfoSec and InfoSec.
There we go.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Non-Political Security Learnings from the Mueller Report. My name is Arkadiy Tetelman. Thanks for being here. When I originally wrote this talk, it was a little bit longer than 25 minutes, so I'm going to try and go really fast. But the slides will be online. It's recorded, of course, so you'll all get to see. The agenda for today, I'm going to start off with some brief background about the Mueller Report, the timeline of the report, kind of give us all some shared context to think about. Then we'll dive into blue team learnings, talk about the timeline of the attacks, recommendations for organizations, what tools the GRU installed, what data they stole, that sort of stuff. Hopefully there's time at the end for questions. So when we're talking about the Mueller Report, this is really the timeline that I'm thinking about. Even as early as May 2014, the IRA, the Internet Research Agency, started their social media disinformation campaign. This was before any candidates had even announced their intention to run for president. So just general sowing discord. And once certain candidates had announced their intention to run, then the campaign did pivot and start to favor certain candidates or disfavor other candidates. A bit later in March to June of 2016 was when you saw the GRU phishing and hacking campaign. So most of the time when the media talks about, Russia hacking the election or all this stuff going on, they're really talking about that 3-month window. That's when the bulk of the activity happened. In July of 2016, the FBI opened their investigation. In May of 2017, Robert Mueller was appointed after James Comey was dismissed. And in March 2019, the FBI investigation was concluded and the redacted report was released a month later. And the redacted report actually was like 95% unredacted. Most of the report was there. So overall, it took about 3 years to do this investigation, employed about 20 attorneys and paralegals, 9 support staff, worked alongside 40 FBI staff. So 70 people working for 3 years, pretty expensive, estimated cost of $25 million. But actually, the report brought in an estimated gain of close to $50 million, paid for itself twice over. The reason for that was that they uncovered a lot of tax evasion, and then they were able to hand that off to the relevant authorities. So the report was split into 2 volumes. The first volume was focused on Russian interference in the 2016 election, which was itself split into 5 different sections. The first one was an introduction. The second section was focused on this active measures social media campaign, which is what the IRA did, kind of like trying to run these political ads on Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere. The third section was the hacking and dumping campaign. Fourth and fifth sections aren't relevant for us. And then the second volume was the administration obstruction of justice. So for this talk, I'm really just going to only be talking about Volume 1, Section 3, the hacking and dumping campaign, because that's what has the most broadly applicable blue team learnings that, we're all security practitioners here. That's what we'll get value out of. I would say that specifically if you work at a social media company like a Twitter or Facebook or something else like that, I do recommend reading the active measures section because there's a lot of interesting information in there for you. And also the report in general. If you don't have the time to read it, the whole thing, it's quite dense. But if you're interested, the executive summaries are only like 20 pages long at the start of each volume. So that's pretty interesting and accessible. So blue team learnings, like I said, we're really just going to zoom in on this 3-month section. That's when the bulk of the activity happened. Starting on March 10th to 15th, the GRU sent out about 90 spear phishing emails to various HillaryClinton.com email addresses. Starting on March 15th, the GRU started to target personal Google accounts of Clinton staffers and some DNC.org accounts. And notably on March 19th, John Podesta was phished. And if you can't recall, John Podesta was Clinton's campaign chairman at the time. So this was a pretty significant event for the election cycle. It was quite damaging, I think. So I'm going to show you an email here. This is an email from Google. Someone has your password. Hi, so-and-so. Someone has your password. Review your devices, go and change your password, etc. I would love to throw a poll to the audience. The 2 options are going to be, this is a real email or this is a phishing email. Can I see a show of hands who thinks this is a real email? I'm a little bit blinded by light, but I think I see like a handful, like 2-3 hands. Who thinks this is a phishing email? A lot more hands, most people. So it turns out it is both. This is a real email that Google will send you if they think with high certainty that someone has logged into your account and it is not you. It is also the template that the GRU used to phish John Podesta. So if you raised your hand for either, you were correct. If you raised your hand for both, you were doubly correct. If you raised your hand for neither, you probably don't like audience participation, but... So John Podesta had a personal aide, Sarah. She had access to his personal email account, and she saw this email first. She saw it before he did, and she thought, something is suspicious about this. It doesn't look quite right. So she forwarded it to the Clinton campaign IT staff, and this was the email exchange that happened. Charles Delavan replied, "Sarah, this is a legitimate email. John needs to change his password immediately and ensure that two-factor authentication is turned on his account. He can go to this link to do both. It is imperative that this is done ASAP." Does anyone see anything weird about this email, something inconsistent? I'm happy to give it away if nobody wants to speak up. Shane, I'm not sure who Shane is, someone else that they decided to CC. Basically, the very first sentence of this email says this is a legitimate email, and the rest of the email seems to scream that this is not a legitimate email. So it's a little bit inconsistent. And so Charles Delavan later gave an interview to the New York Times where he said that his bad advice was the result of a typo. He knew this was a phishing attack as the campaign was getting dozens of them. He said he had meant to type that it was an illegitimate email, an error that he said has plagued him ever since. Which is just fascinating to me because I think we talk a lot in security about how we have to do things that scale. We can't depend on these single point of failures. Like one person needs to patch the server. One person needs to recognize the phishing email. Obviously these things will never scale. At the same time, I think this was a pretty pivotal moment in 2016. So it's just very interesting to think about the counterfactual of what would have happened if he didn't make that typo. So in terms of overall phished accounts, the GRU phished numerous email accounts of Clinton campaign employees and volunteers. They phished junior volunteers assigned to the Clinton campaign's advance team. They phished informal Clinton campaign advisors. They phished a DNC employee. Overall, you had about 120 GRU officers stealing tens of thousands of emails. John Podesta alone had 50 to 60,000 emails stolen from his email account. So what can you do? First and foremost, super basic and easy, password managers and hardware 2FA tokens. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. This is not going to be news to anyone here. I think most of the time we want to do these things, and the bigger problem is getting organizational buy-in, getting resource and budget and headcount and that sort of stuff. But this really is probably the #1 most effective way to prevent this, because both of these tools, when you register on a particular website, the password manager or the hardware token will be bound to the domain name of that website. And if subsequently someone sends you a phishing link that is for a different, off by one character letter, then those tools simply won't log you in. So Brian Krebs had this article posted where he looked at Google's rollout of 2FA across their entire fleet of employees. At the time in 2017, it was more than 90,000 people, and their phishing rate fell to 0. They were completely eliminated this class of problem because the device won't authenticate to a website that is not the legitimate website. And just an alert on DNS, so much valuable query data in passive DNS. You can look at, most of the time I think when employees need to get work done, they really are going to be using a small set of websites in their day-to-day work. If you have one single laptop that has made one single query to this domain name that you've never seen before, you can probably alert on that. Maybe you can join it with some intelligence data around this is a recently registered domain, or this domain has a high threat score or something like that. If that's still too noisy, you could decide, hey, I really want to protect these 5 to 10 domains, like G Suite and Okta, for example. I really want to protect those 2 domains. And so if you ever see a DNS query that is off by one character of one of those domain names that you care about, that could be alert worthy. Scan incoming emails, lots of open source tools to do this, lots of vendors that do this. Airbnb open sourced a tool called Email Alert. It'll just scan every incoming email and run Yara rules against it. So that's pretty easy. Ingest mail audit log events. G Suite, Office 365, others, they all provide an audit log that you can programmatically ingest and say, hey, someone reset their 2FA token, someone went through a password reset flow, someone logged in from Russia or Egypt or Brazil, they're sitting right next to me, what's going on? Pretty valuable. Phishing exercises ? The reason that I have a question mark here, I think there are some pros and cons to deploying phishing exercises within your company. On the pro side, you will without a doubt systematically reduce the number of employees who fall for phishing, like real phishing attacks. You will without a doubt systematically increase the amount of employees who are reporting phishing emails to you. So you will have increased visibility. And also, I think security has a real problem with metrics, and this is very measurable. You can, definitively say, our click-through rate dropped 5% this quarter over the past quarter, and you can measure that, and you can share it up in presentations, and that's great. Some of the cons for phishing exercises, depending on your company culture, you might not be able to get buy-in to roll this out. Some employees might feel it is adversarial, and it might hurt your relationship with them. And also, I think you're never going to drive this down to zero. Just like with Charles Delavin, it's like there's always going to be that one odd case, that one edge case. And so you have to assume that phishing is going to happen anyway, and then defend against it no matter what, have defense in depth, maybe deploy some sort of endpoint monitoring and see suspicious process activity or see other behavior. And so if you're going to be doing those things anyway, no matter what, you still have to deploy those solutions, then is it worth the mental burden that you're placing on employees to think, hey, I'm being phished by my own company right now? So, pros and cons to this approach. And then there's some basic email security technologies. I'm not going to go into depth on these, but these first three help verify the authenticity of email. The latter two help verify that email is encrypted in transit, and they're more recent. So those are things that you can deploy. There was an interesting blog post, or a few interesting blog posts, where they're looking at the current 2020 candidate campaigns and their emails. And so you see about 50% of them use DMARC, which, if you're glass half full or glass half empty, could be good or bad. I think it's decent. I think we're trending up. It's certainly more than 2016, but we also still have a ways to go. Okay, so we're only a month in. We got John Podesta phished on March 19th. The GRU gained access to the DCCC network on April 12th using credentials that they had spearphished from those spearphishing emails that they had been sending out. And there's a quote in the report. Over the ensuing weeks, the GRU traversed the network, identifying different computers connected to the DCCC network by stealing network access credentials along the way, including those of IT administrators with unrestricted access to the system. The GRU compromised approximately 25 different computers on the DCCC network. So over the following weeks, after April 12th, compromised approximately 30 hosts. Some people may not realize that the DCCC was hacked at all, or that they were hacked first before the DNC, but they were hacked first. So you might ask the question, how was the DNC hacked? Was it also through spear phishing? And to answer that, I want to take a little sidestep here into the structure of the Democratic Party. You've got three components. The Democratic National Committee, the DNC, focuses on the presidential campaign and the party convention. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, DCCC, focuses on the congressional races, and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee focuses on the Senate races. And that last one was not hacked, to my knowledge. There was no public reporting it was hacked. I'm just including it for completeness. So the DCCC and DNC, even though they're separate organizations, they do work quite closely together. They work so closely together that the DCCC had VPN access into the DNC's internal network. And so that's how the GRU gained access. They were already on the DCCC network. They were able to use that VPN to pivot into the DNC. So yeah, April 18th, a week later after getting access to the DCCC network, they were able to pivot. Recommendations: just don't allow third-party access into your network. So easy. Why didn't they think of that? Obviously, I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek here. We, as security practitioners, I think we all receive these requests of, hey, I just need this thing to do my job. I don't have the resources to build it out the right way. Can you just give me access? You're blocking me right now. And come on. So there was a footnote in the report here. The VPN in this case had been created to give a small number of DCCC employees access to certain databases housed on the DNC network, which is, exactly the request that all of us receive. So segregate access, practice least privilege, add monitoring, all the usual things. I think they probably could have done more to reduce the blast radius here, so that given the VPN access, they shouldn't have been able to pivot as far as they did. And all of these other practices that, again, are basic standard information security practices. Over the following weeks, or more than a month even, they compromised an additional 30 DNC hosts, and then around June 8th is when the compromise was officially removed. So installed tools. Once they were on the network, what did they do? There were 4 tools called out in the report. The first one was called Xagent. It was a bespoke tool, not anything that you can find on the internet. They wrote it for this. It can log keystrokes, take screenshots, gather file system and operating system information, etc. The second bespoke tool that they installed was called Xtunnel. It was used for creating an encrypted tunnel for large-scale data transfer so that they could exfiltrate all of that data. Mimikatz. If you're not familiar with Mimikatz, it's a Windows credential harvesting tool that'll gather credentials from memory. So that one is open source. WinRAR. This one surprised me. These were like the 4 tools called out. I guess if you're going to hack the DNC, you want WinRAR to compress your files. That was one of the tools installed. In terms of stolen data, you've got keylog sessions containing passwords, internal communications, banking information, sensitive PII, various internal strategy documents, fundraising data, opposition research, emails from work inboxes. In total, they exfiltrated more than 70 gigabytes in election documents. I wanted to talk a little bit about the structure of the GRU. Thus far, we've been saying, they're a single entity, but of course they have sub-teams. So within the report, there were 2 units called out. One of them is called Unit 26165. They primarily focused on spear phishing. So they wrote those email templates that were used. They focused on building malware. So the 2, Xagent and Xtunnel, they wrote the bespoke piece of software. And they were mining Bitcoin, actually. They used freshly minted coins to purchase some of the infrastructure that was used in the attacks. So some of the hosting infrastructure, and also later for disseminating information, there was a particular domain name that was purchased through Bitcoin as well. The other unit involved Unit 74455. I'll just read this quote. They assisted with the release and promotion of stolen materials. And the quote is, officers from Unit 74455 separately hacked computers belonging to state boards of elections, secretaries of state, and U.S. companies that supplied software and other technology related to the administration of U.S. elections. Again, I think that the DNC really received the majority of media reporting, but there were these peripheral hacks going on as well. In terms of exfiltration and what that looked like, they were already on the DNC and DCCC network. From there, they reached out to so-called middle servers that they had stood up and purchased with Bitcoin, like I mentioned. From there, they reached out to, I don't know what AMS stands for, but that was the name. I think it's the internal GRU name, maybe, but this was their command and control center. So this was where GRU agents logged in and reviewed screenshots, reviewed keylogging sections, downloaded data, locally onto their computers, issued commands to execute on the DNC network. And from there, it went to the GRU. So overall recommendations, alert on Mimikatz. Obviously, there's a lot of things you should alert on, but I think this one is kind of a freebie. Like if you see Mimikatz on a production host, you should probably be paging engineers. Endpoint monitoring, for sure. There's a bunch of vendors like Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, choose your favorite. It doesn't really matter. Even if you don't have the resources to tune the alerts or manually do investigations or whatever, it's fine. If you're even just collecting the audit log data, then it can be so valuable after the fact to be able to go, do historical forensic analysis and say, here are the exact files that were accessed. Here are the exact commands that were executed, even if you can't make full use of those capabilities. And if you can make full use of them, then even better. Network segregation, I already mentioned. Intrusion detection system, maybe. I mean, every company I've ever worked at, we had an IDS. It's been mostly false positives, but maybe we're not tuning it correctly. Maybe it could have helped. Hard to say. So overall conclusions, if you look at the attack vectors, spear phishing for the initial foothold, lateral movement via overprivileged permissions, and Mimikatz, pretty standard. You see many things in other corporate breaches. Many similar things. Overall recommendations, practice defense in depth, set up 2FA on all the things, have endpoint monitoring, practice least privilege. Again, nothing new. This is well known to all of us, but I think it's interesting to look at it through the perspective and lens of this attack on the 2016 election. The last thing I'll say is that it's pretty easy for me to sit here and armchair judge the DNC, but I think that realistically few organizations can defend themselves against the nation state, so that's a hard thing to do. With that, I will take questions. If you're interested in my Twitter, that's my Twitter. Also, just like everyone else wearing a blue wristband, I am hiring. Come talk to me outside or DM me on Twitter if you're interested in that. How much time do I have? Okay.
If there were one thing to take away from this that could have been the best preventative medicine, would you say user education would be the best? Falling for spear phishing?
I really like 2FA or like the hardware tokens or password managers. I think user education, as good as it is, and I focus a lot on user education at every company that I've ever worked at, it's like that thing that I mentioned where like you just can't depend on getting that down to 100%. No matter how much education you put out, still someone's going to click the link. Still someone's going to like, execute the attachment. All right, I think that's time. If you have more questions, I'll just be right outside in the hallway. I'd love to chat about it. So thank you so much.